So on this page, we've talked a lot about what we believe is the strongest village in the Naruto universe. We've said it was the village hidden in the leaves or the village hidden in the clouds, depending on how you look at it. And while that's all well and good, and you can decide, well, maybe I'd want to live in the hidden clouds if I was in the Narutoverse, or the hidden leaf because they're the strongest and safest villages. But where would you not want to live? Where is the weakest village in Naruto? Well, the weakest ninja village, that is. I could go on and on about how the land of hot water is the weakest country in the entire Narutoverse, but that's not an interesting video. No, today we are talking the weakest ninja village in Naruto. And the answer might actually surprise you. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for more NC Hammer 23 content, guys, pop on over to my other page, NC Gamer 23, where I play video games. We're gaining about 100 subscribers a day over there. We are on our way to being the biggest gaming page on YouTube, so get there early, I guess. So there's a lot of ways to gauge strength in the Naruto universe. And both my Why Konoha is the strongest village and Is Konoha the strongest village videos, I talked about how different factors play into a village's strength. These factors begin all the way back from when the village was incepted to now, present day. So I'm not just talking how many soldiers you can mobilize. I'm talking how is the strength of your agriculture, how strong is your economy, and yes, how many soldiers can you mobilize? So without further ado, what is the weakest village in Naruto? Well, unfortunately for you Gaara fans out there, it's the Hidden Sand. Now this might seem wild to you because the Hidden Sand are the antagonists of a large part of Naruto, and they had Konoha on their back heels for a little while there. On top of that, the Sand siblings, Gaara, Tamari, and Kankuro, are very strong. So how is a nation with three of the strongest characters in the entire show the weakest nation? Well, let's start these videos off in the way that we tend to start these videos off and talk about the beginning. The village hidden in the sand actually has a pretty well documented beginning. You see, after the Warring States period ended and Hashirama and Madara decided to shake hands and create Konoha, it put other ninjas into a bind. Now two of the strongest clans on Earth have come together to form an alliance, meaning that hypothetically, if we do not band together and create villages of our own, we will get crushed. And that was actually exactly what Madara wanted to do after forming this alliance with Hashirama. So the formation of the four other major ninja villages was purely defensive, but the formation of the Hidden Sand village was arguably the hardest to pull off. You see, the Land of Wind is all desert, and during the Warring States period, there was just nomadic clans that wandered around the Land of Wind, and they were ninjas. You see, the Land of Wind is so large and so splayed out that ninjas often wouldn't bump into each other. There wasn't a lot of infighting. There wasn't wars in the Land of Wind like there was between Hashirama and Madara's respective clans. But because of this, there was also no alliances, no allegiances. There was just kind of ninjas spread about an entire country. But with this kind of freedom also creates a kind of person who doesn't want to bow down to others. Why should I join up with you? What if you take the charge? This is actually where our first person of import comes in, Redo, the first Kazekage. You see, Redo was dauntingly powerful. He came from an era where shinobis were forged in the flame of battle and was still a cut above. You see, it's stated in his databook entry that he used his overwhelming power to gather the desert-dwelling shinobi of the Land of Wind. Essentially, he demonstrated to all the people of the Land of Wind that his power was so significant that people should stand under him, that under his rule that they would stand a chance against other shinobi villages if they came together. Now, we don't know Redo's abilities. We just know that his power was strong enough to unify the entire country. Now, that's a feat that's a bit easier than what Hashirama or Madara had to do in the Land of Fire, but still very significant. And while we don't know the feats that led up to Redo becoming the first Kazekage, after he became the first Kazekage, we have a very tangible feat that he pulled off. You see, when Hagoromo made the 9-tailed beast out of the 10 tails, he put them in specific locations. And in the Land of Wind, he placed Shukaku, the 1-tails. Now, say what you will about Kurama teasing Shukaku for only having one tail and thus implying that Shukaku is the weakest because of his 1-tail status. There is no actual lore in the Naruto verse that says that tails relate to power outside of the fact that Kurama is the most powerful. Regardless, Shukaku is a very powerful entity, an entity that Redo caught. See, when the first ever 5 Kage summit was held, Hashirama had captured 8 of the 9-tailed beasts, and he was offering to sell them to the other Kage to promote peace. Kind of a mutually assured destruction approach. But there was one problem. Redo had already caught one of the tailed beasts, so he didn't need Hashirama's handout. In fact, he demanded that because he had caught his own tailed beast, that he got a cut of every single one of the tailed beasts that Hashirama sold. On top of that, he wanted part of the Land of Fire's fertile land. This is one of the most ridiculous asks in the history history of business deals. Yes, Redo caught a tailed beast. Congratulations, you're talking to a guy who caught 8. And once again, we don't know Redo's abilities, and obviously Hashirama's abilities are built exactly for capturing tailed beasts. Wood release suppresses tailed beast power. So sure, maybe Redo was able to pure strength Shukaku down into a seal, or maybe he had help. Regardless, just because you caught your own tailed beast doesn't mean you should get a cut of mine. Just say you don't want a tailed beast and I won't sell you one. But then again, Hashirama wasn't selling these tailed beasts to make money, he was selling them for peace. And Redo was basically saying, well, if you want me to be peaceful, you're gonna have to pay me, because I don't need what you're handing out. Redo actually makes a couple of good points here, essentially saying that my country is entirely infertile. We are a landlocked desert country which has no promises of agricultural advancement. So please, just give me fertile land and we'll be cool. Now, Hashirama essentially just says, please, can we all get along? And I think Redo might actually back down. We don't really see how the summit concludes. But Konoha didn't hand over any of that fertile land, and none of the Kage seemed like they wanted to hand over 30% to Redo. So maybe he just packed up and went home? Which is actually probably why we fell into the First Great Shinobi World War in the first place. Yes, obviously Hashirama was able to sell some of the tailed beasts to the other nations, but the Hidden Sand basically walked away with nothing and no incentive for peace. And a war could provide to them the fertile land that they need. Because I'll remind you that the Land of Wind and the Land of Fire are right next to each other. Since we're talking about the Land of Wind just as a whole and not about the people that grew up in it, let's talk about the Land of Wind for a second. Redo nailed it directly on the head. The Land of Wind is an infertile, hostile place to live. It's a desert. But Redo also says something interesting during this 5 Kage summit. He calls the Land of Wind desert locked, which I assume to be kind of close to landlocked, meaning that they do not have a coast or any access to water. And here's the thing, that's kind of a weird point. Let's talk about it. So on conventionally accepted Naruto maps, the back end of the Land of Wind is never seen. It's because almost every single map that we get is just a square. So we see the part of the Land of Wind that leads to Konoha and the Hidden Stone because it's in the southwestern corner. But it appears as though there's ocean to both the south and the west of the Hidden Sand. But we don't see this ocean, which makes me believe there might actually be more land behind the Hidden Sand, or that the Hidden Sand doesn't have access to the ocean in one way or another, which would really take the only saving grace for either their economy or their agricultural systems away from them. So as a country, you're a desert with no water and no ocean. And on top of that, to your north is the Hidden Stone, and to your east is the Hidden Fire. Now, the Hidden Stone is one of the few villages we really haven't covered in depth yet. But the Hidden Stone, out of all the villages in Naruto, has the largest standing army. And while very few ninjas of true regard have spun out of the Hidden Stone, they are still a very formidable and offensively minded nation. You see, the Hidden Stone is fundamental in basically any shinobi great war. And then to your east, you have the Hidden Leaf, which is just flaunting all its fertile land around, and is also probably the strongest village out there, especially in the era of Redo. So you're not strong enough to expand because you can't increase your military might because you don't have the economic or agricultural means to do so. So what do? Well, you can still try, and that's what they did. Fortunately, the one thing that the Hidden Sand has going for it is that it is located in a desert, and therefore is very hard to attack. It is very hard to march an army of people not used to a desert across a desert. Not to mention that the Hidden Sand itself is actually stuck between 2 very large cliffs, and the only way to get in is a tight tunnel. So it's almost impossible to attack from the ground. So the Hidden Sand could launch offensive campaigns and not worry about having them come back at them, which is more likely than not what happened during the First Great Shinobi World War. See, we don't really know what happened during the First Great Shinobi World War. We know the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Mist were in a battle, and we know the Hidden Cloud and Konoha were in a battle. It's somewhat implied that the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Sand were in a battle because the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Sand have hated each other forever, and the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Sand had documented skirmishes that led up to the First Great Shinobi World War. So to assume that they made it official during the First Great Shinobi World War is not the craziest assumption of all time, especially when you consider the fact that Redo almost definitely died during the First Shinobi World War. How do we know this? Well, we don't, technically, but we do know a couple of things that lead us in that direction. See, there's a curse on the Kazekage. Not only are they cursed to lead the weakest village, which has no agricultural or economic means of its own, they are all cursed to die at the blade of an assassin. As to why, I don't know, maybe because they treated Shukaku so poorly, but we know for sure that both the 3rd and the 4th Kazekages were assassinated. And it's stated several times that all Kazekages had been assassinated, implying that both the 1st and the 2nd were. Then you take into account the fact fact that Rasa, the 4th Kazekage and also Gaara's father, was in charge of the Hidden Sand by the time the Third Great Shinobi World War came afoot, which would mean that both the 2nd and the 3rd Kazekages would have to have ruled and died before the Third Great Shinobi World War, which gives us about 30 years. So my personal headcanon is that after the Hidden Sand realized that this war was draining what few resources they had, they decided the one person who's probably the reason that this war started because of his refusal to join the peace treaty should probably go, and thus he was assassinated, and the Hidden Sand withdrew from the First Great Shinobi World War. But here's the thing, your leaders dying left, right, and center to assassins is also not great for building the strength of a village. Think of the turmoil that Konoha was tossed into when Hiruzen was killed by Orochimaru. Hell, think of the turmoil that happened when Tsunade fell into a coma. Being a major village with a power vacuum is a big deal, and when it's the standard amongst those who lead you, that's not good. But if there was one person who did succeed in bringing a little bit of stability to the Hidden Sand, it was the 2nd Kazekage. You see, the 2nd Kazekage focused on what he believed was important: military might. Shimon, the 2nd Kazekage, realized we're probably not going to be selling crops or any major exports, and thus we have to focus on one thing and one thing alone: shinobi missions. You see, smaller villages will contract ninja villages to complete shinobi missions, and then that money gets refunneled into the economy of the shinobi village. The only problem is you have to be able to do that work cheap and effectively. And to offer cheap and effective labor, you need strong shinobi. And you also need a lot of shinobi. You see, the Sand is not a populous region. In the data books, out of 5, its population is rated 2, the lowest out of the 5 major villages. But then again, its economy and its military are both rated 2s as well, also the lowest out of the 5 villages. Shamon wanted to fix this population issue. And since they couldn't produce enough food to produce a bolstering population, what he did was look into puppets. You see, there was a man in the Hidden Sand by the name of Manzaemon Chikamatsu, the creator of puppetry within the ninja world, and also a famous Japanese playwright famous for his puppetry. Shamon saw Manzaemon Chikamatsu using his puppets to entertain the masses and found a way to apply that to military might. Essentially, Shamon figured that if you could have one ninja controlling 10 puppets, he is now 10 shinobi. And this was actually incredibly effective. So effective that an entire brigade called the Puppet Brigade was created. And these puppeteers were able to stay off the front lines and have literal lifeless clones do all their battle for them. This both increased military might and reduced casualties. But this isn't all that Shimon achieved. Shimon also started studying the Jinchuriki that they had within the Hidden Sand. You see, since they caught Shukaku, he had been forced into a Jinchuriki who had been forced into jail. Essentially, both Shukaku and his Jinchuriki were forced inside of a teapot for the entirety of their existence. Shukaku was never treated well in the Hidden Sand. But Shimon was interested in the abilities of Shukaku, specifically his magnet release. So he actually created a team of scientists within the Hidden Sand to investigate Shukaku's magnet release. And surprisingly enough, they were able to reverse engineer Shukaku's magnet release by the time the 3rd Kazekage came around. Yeah, the 3rd Kazekage was not born with magnet release. He figured it out by investigating Shukaku. And with that magnet release, he was able to control Iron Sand, effectively making him the strongest Kazekage ever. Gaara's stronger than him now. But when they first said it, he was, in fact, the strongest Kazekage ever. And for a while there, things looked really good until the 2nd Great Shinobi World War came around. You see, at this point, the military might of the Sand had increased exponentially. The Puppet Brigade, led by Granny Chiu, was one of the most effective killing machines ever created. Granny Chiu went head to head against Hanzo the Salamander and the Hidden Leaf and everybody, basically. And her myriad of poison knowledge that allowed her to extrapolate and create new poisons that were incurable, on top of the fact that she had 10 of Manzaemon Chikamatsu's best puppets of all time, made her an unstoppable killing machine. Not to mention the fact that the Hidden Sand just became the first people on Earth to reinvent a Kekkei Genkai. Things look good. Only problem is they got dragged into the 2nd Great Shinobi World War, and Granny Chiu wasn't strong enough to defeat Hanzo, and all of her poisons kept getting countered by Tsunade. And all of the military might progress they had made seemed to get undone by villages making just as much progress as them. Imagine how aggravating that is. You come from a deserted, infertile land. You have gone all in on military might, and the best weapon you have, Granny Chiu, who is formidable as hell, isn't enough to get you even the smallest bit of fertile land. You lose to the small nation between you and the Hidden Fire. And not to mention, Sakamo Hatsuke is absolutely tearing your country to shreds. While the legendary Sannin are in the Hidden Rain fighting Hanzo the Salamander, Sakamo Hatake, Kakashi's father, is leading a offensive campaign in the Hidden Sand, and it's going quite well for him. In fact, it's going so well for him that this is where he earned his moniker, the White Fang. Do you remember how when those two Hidden Stone shinobi saw Kakashi, they were afraid that he was his father, and they started to retreat because Sakamo Hatake had a run-on sight order? Yeah, that's because he wasn't only in the Hidden Sand, he also went to the Hidden Stone. But how do we know that he was in the Hidden Sand? Well, mostly the fact that he killed Sasori's parents, who, by the way, were two incredibly strong shinobi. So now, not only has the Hidden Sand failed to make any progress offensively, defensively, their line is falling apart as well. And Shimon dies. How exactly? We don't know, but we know it's an assassin's blade. I like to think that once again, the village was not very happy that somebody who said, we're gonna bolster the military might of our village and thus diverted resources away from everything else, was now seeing absolutely no return on investment. And in fact, there's a guy out there with a chakra saber cutting down people's parents. And so they killed him in order to promote his bodyguard, the guy who just reversed engineered the Kekkei Genkai of Shukaku and could now control Iron Sand. So now your village, which is already starting in a really rough spot, has been on the losing side of 2 straight wars. You've lost 2 leaders in about 20 years, and you only have 1 tailed beast. See, this is the miscalculation that Redo made. By rejecting Hashirama's offer for a tailed beast, he didn't do a lot of math. Sure, of course, Hashirama was only going to keep 1 tailed beast for himself. But the miscalculation that Redo made was assuming that Hashirama wouldn't keep the strongest one. And of course, Hashirama and Tobirama knew which one was the strongest one because they A, sorted them into strength, and B, Hashirama fought them all. So the Hidden Cloud ended up with 2, the Hidden Stone ended up with 2, the Hidden Mist ended up with 2. And yet, the Hidden Sand only had 1. On top of that, your strongest shinobi is aging. Granny Chiu is in her 50s. But hey, at least you have Sasori, you know, that guy who just got trained by Granny Chiu. He's your next generation, right? I mean, he is a child genius, so capable of creating new and inventive puppets. There's no way he's not going to outshine Granny Chiu one day. And for a while, this was absolutely the case. Sasori is most likely the strongest puppet master of all time. In fact, he's so powerful that his defensive campaign in the Third Great Shinobi World War earned him the nickname of Sasori of the Red Sand because he dyed the sand red with the enemy's blood. He was able to make puppets so lifelike and so powerful that they seemed like they were humans, and he could control 100 of these humans at one time. He was the perfect embodiment of what Shimon wanted. One man who could act as 100. You know those super lifelike puppets? Yeah, that's because they were once humans. Sasori went so far as to make one of his best friends who died in a battle into a puppet. And then when Sasori wanted a stronger puppet, arguably the strongest puppet, he kidnapped the 3rd Kazekage. Well, I should say he killed the 3rd Kazekage and then he took his body. But Sasori was so talented as a puppeteer, he was able to give this puppet the Iron Sand ability, a feat which is not talked about enough. But then of course, you know, he abandons the village. So now the prodigy, the grandchild of the strongest shinobi you had for generations, has not only killed the 3rd Kazekage, but they've left. Not to mention that in the Third Great Shinobi World War, you were fighting an entirely defensive battle against the Hidden Stone. And while you didn't necessarily lose anything because you had Sasori fighting for you, you didn't gain anything. Well, I guess you didn't lose land, but you did lose one very important thing: people. Again, for the 3rd war in a row. For 3 wars now, you have no spoils of war. You have just lost shinobi. And I don't know if you remember what I said earlier, but in order to send your shinobi out on shinobi missions for smaller villages, you need strong shinobi and a lot of them. Because of this shortage of manpower, the Hidden Sand services got a bit more expensive, and that's not good. In fact, their services got so much more expensive that the Land of Wind Daimyo actually started outsourcing shinobi work to Konoha. You see, Konoha has a 5 in population according to the data book, meaning their population is over double that of the Hidden Sand. So even if the Hidden Sand shinobi were just as strong as those from Konoha, it would still be significantly cheaper to get them from Konoha. On top of that, Konoha is not that far from the Hidden Sand, so economically it just made sense. This is a massive problem. For generations, the Hidden Sand has been focusing on harnessing the power of its shinobi in order to get these missions. And now, being on the losing side of 3 straight wars, they no longer have access to these missions. They have no trade, no agriculture, and no missions, effectively just creating a situation where they all just die in the desert. Fortunately, the 4th Kazekage, Rasa, Gaara's father, had a somewhat solution to this. You see, Rasa, just like the 3rd Kazekage, whose name we do not know, had magnet release. It's just something they can pass along now because they figured it out from Shukaku. But Rasa couldn't control iron sand. No, Rasa can control gold sand, which is not as powerful as iron sand. It's more malleable, less plentiful, and I think less heavy. It is, however, very good for sealing Shukaku because gold is heavier than sand. Gold dust is also good for another thing, filling your empty coffers. Rasa started to collect gold dust and sell it to other villages to make up for the economic losses of everything else. But the village quickly started to realize that we couldn't rely on each other. Essentially, the nomadic and individualistic ways of those who were brought to the Hidden Sand by Redo decades ago started to resurface. People realized that the village wasn't providing for me. So people started to realize it's better to focus on an individual strength as opposed to teamwork or a collaborative effort. And nobody believed this more than Rasa. See, Rasa wanted his family to be the strongest. Rasa knew that in a society built out of people only looking to better themselves, that those who were the strongest would rise to the top. So Rasa decided to seal Shukaku in his youngest son. See, neither Kankuro or Tamari had the affinity for it, but Rasa realized that Gaara did. So from the very second that Gaara was conceived, Rasa started to make him into the ultimate weapon in his mind. Think about it. Instead of focusing on something like a puppet brigade, Rasa was more worried about making one ultimate weapon. One person who could keep everybody away from the village or push an offensive campaign forward. Because for decades, focusing on a collaborative effort hadn't worked. And if they were being real with themselves, for decades, they had been carried by one person. It was Monzaemon Chikamatsu, and then it was Chiyo, and then it was Sasori. Rasa realized that success had come through this lineage and decided to continue it himself. But there was no promising puppeteers, at least on Sasori's level. So a Jinchuriki was their only hope. The only problem is that Shukaku had been treated poorly by the Hidden Sand the entire time they had known each other. So Shukaku terrorized Gaara. He wouldn't let Gaara sleep, and if Gaara did fall asleep, he would take over Gaara's body and start terrorizing the Hidden Sand. And this made sense for Shukaku. He had been sealed inside of a kettle for decades. And as time marched on, Rasa started to realize that Gaara would never get Shukaku under control. So Rasa, determined to cut his losses, ordered many assassinations on Gaara, all of which Gaara avoided. And all of these assassinations actually taught Gaara how to control Shukaku, which apparently won Daddy's love because Rasa started calling off the assassinations. And boom, finally, an ultimate weapon that is loyal to the Hidden Sand. Now it doesn't matter if we can't plant plants or ship goods. We have somebody who we can use to take other people's stuff. And 12 years later, they were finally presented with an opportunity to do just that. You see, Orochimaru approached the Hidden Sand, and specifically Rasa, and was essentially like, yo, we should take over Konoha. You guys have been trying to take over Konoha literally since it was formed. So if you help me take over Konoha, I'll give you some land, and then boom, you don't even have to focus on using Gaara so heavily. And so they send Gaara to the tuning exams to basically destroy Konoha from the inside out, and things are looking like really good. You know, until Orochimaru kills Rasa so that he can impersonate him to get close to Hiruzen, to kill Hiruzen. 4 for 4. So now the Hidden Sand has launched an offensive campaign against the strongest village on Earth and sent their perfect weapon to this village, and the perfect weapon lost. And we've also lost our 4th Kazekage to an assassin's blade, and we quite literally have nobody to fill Rasa's role. Not to mention the literal thousands of Hidden Sand shinobi who died in the Konoha Crush arc. I think Might Guy and Kakashi alone are responsible for killing like close to 100 of them. So once again, on the losing side of a war effort, they kind of have to return to the Hidden Sand with their tails between their legs. Fortunately, they can play the card that their Kazekage had been assassinated and that they were misled into this Konoha Crush. Even though it's not really true because Ross is not assassinated until much later on in the arc. Like, they still very much agreed to invade Konoha. It was always really weird to me that they just let them get away with that. But how much worse could things get, right? I mean, we're not gonna put a 13-year-old in charge or anything. Oh, They did that, didn't they? Obviously, Gaara got talk no jutsu'd into being a good guy and was actually able to turn the Hidden Sand village around a little bit. Gaara started to reverse the ideology of the Hidden Sand. Essentially, he emphasized focused on growing together instead of individual, and he used this ideology to improve the strength of the Hidden Sand a little bit. But then, you know, 2.5 years after the Konoha Crush arc, he gets abducted by Deidara and then he gets killed. And obviously he comes back and he leads the allied shinobi forces and all of that, and it's super duper cute. But all of the problems of the Hidden Sand still persist even though Gaara is the Kazekage. Even now in Boruto, they don't have a thriving economic system. They haven't found a way to establish agricultural practices. They still only have one tailed beast, and actually at the current moment, that tailed beast lives with Naruto. At the end of the Mitsuki retrieval arc, they actually send Shukaku out of the Hidden Sand to live in Konoha, which means that the Hidden Sand has effectively 0 tailed beasts, especially when you subscribe to the theory that the one-tailed Shukaku is gonna go into Himawari. At least I hope, man. Please just give her something. Truly, the only silver lining for the Hidden Sand is their upcoming crop of shinobi, specifically Shinki. Gaara adopted a child who had magnet release, specifically the magnet release of the 3rd Kazekage. Shinki is able to control Iron Sand and is the clear-cut winner for next Kazekage, but that doesn't really mean anything. The Hidden Cloud has made cannons that can shoot the moon. We learned that in Naruto the Last, that the Hidden Cloud has focused on weapons research in the time of peace in order to make massive chakra cannons. Konoha has become the tech capital of the world. The Hidden Mist is now a popular tourist destination and just all around nice place to be. Inoki did incredible scientific research in the Hidden Stone that allowed him to essentially recreate himself, and that self can use particle release better than he ever could. But what has the Hidden Sand accomplished in this next generation? There's a train that runs from the Hidden Sand to Konoha now that was built by the Thunder Rail Company, which belongs to Konoha. I think the Hidden Sand tells an interesting story, a story that lies at the base of basically all Naruto stories. The Hidden Sand tells the story that the subject of your birth can very much decide who you become in your life, but only if you let it. If Redo accepted Hashirama's deal for peace and took one of the tailed beasts, maybe the First Shinobi World War wouldn't have happened. Maybe Redo wouldn't have been assassinated. Maybe they could have used those 2-tailed beasts to launch a more effective battle against Konoha or the Hidden Stone. Maybe in that era of peace, they could have focused on agricultural advances or establishing technological dominance. Hell, you had the scientific prowess to backwards engineer a Kekkei Genkai that you could then apply to some of the strongest people in your village. You made a puppeteer brigade. Why didn't you make a magnet release brigade? The story of the Hidden Sand tells a story of dissension and distrust. How individualistic natures will never get you far, and that ultimately you need to rely on those around you if you ever want to establish true might and true glory in this world. An army of one is just an outing. And while we've seen one-man armies in Naruto, like Minato, these are people who in their final moments have needed those around them in order to achieve what they need in their life most. Minato died with his wife's arms around his waist as she helped him seal the thing that was going to destroy their village together. The 3rd Raikage fought off 10,000 men for 3 days straight, so his army could make it back to their village. Collaboration and cooperation is one of the most important themes throughout all of Naruto. And maybe the denial of this cooperation and collaboration, and instead focusing on individualistic desires, is the curse that plagued the Kazekage, because every single one of them died alone until one of them realized that they needed the people around them. But then again, what do I know? It's just something to think on. What do you guys think? Why do you think the Kazekage have all been assassinated? Tell me in the comments below. And while you're there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Here's my thing about magnet release. Okay, obviously iron sand and gold sand, that makes sense. Both of those things are magnetic. How does magnet release attract sand?